Hi everyone, it's Anna, and today is such a gloomy day, which fits our video perfectly this time because we're gonna be talking about some books that have stuck with me over the years since I read them. And today's weather is just perfect for that because all of these books are so sad in a way. I read all these books a while ago, and that's why I think they deserve to be in this video because they have truly stuck with me to this day and I still think about them. And the first book I'm going to talk about is called The Stranger in the Woods by Michael Finkel, a non-fiction book based on the real life story of Christopher Knight, an American man who chose to live his normal life and went to live in the woods. So he lived there for 27 years without speaking to anyone, completely alone, until he was caught by the police and eventually imprisoned. The reason why he was imprisoned is in the book, and I don't think I need to tell you that if you're interested in reading it. The author of the book introduced himself as a journalist when he started visiting Christopher in jail. And that's how we got the book, basically. He introduced himself as a journalist and cautiously asked Christopher to tell us his story. And the book tells us a lot about Christopher's personality, his childhood, his mental health, his family, his social life, and many other things. It also shows us how he survived for 27 years in the woods alone. And as far as I can tell, there are even photos of his campsite on the internet. And I remember looking it up after finishing the book, not believing my eyes that I could actually see his campsite, that place where, he lived, because I was so blown away by his story. And I understand the police, I understand why he was imprisoned in the end, but they had to, because according to law, you're not allowed to do things that he did a lot of times. So on one hand, he managed to survive in the woods for 27 years because he did all those things, but on the other hand, they were the reason he was imprisoned. And that's why I can understand the police, I can understand their actions and the decisions, but I think it was too cruel of them to take some of those actions against Christopher, considering how he lived for those 27 years before getting imprisoned. I felt so conflicted at times, but mostly touched and just so impressed by his mindset, I think, by how different he is from most people. The title sounded so interesting in the language that I read the book in. I bought it just because of the title, because I liked the title and I was like, I need this book. I don't know why, but I just felt that I had come across something very valuable. It was amazing to hear Christopher's thoughts and his take on being among people, how to be in the middle of nature, completely alone, but not completely helpless, I guess. It was so interesting. It was so insightful too. And I think the outcome of his journey is both fair and unfair, depending on how you look at it. Yeah, I'm so glad that I came across that book, and I didn't even know what it was about when I decided to buy it, and I'm so glad I did because it turned my life upside down at the time in the best way possible. I think when you hear someone talking about it, it might sound bizarre, but when you're actually reading it and you start understanding why he did that, what he felt, being almost in the middle of nowhere physically, but feeling so at peace mentally, it doesn't seem so bizarre. And I still like telling others about this book because of how it impacted me at the time. The next book I'm going to talk about is I Must Betray You by Ruta Sepetys. We're set in Romania 1989 during the communist regime, and we follow a 17-year-old boy navigating his life through the obstacles imposed on him by the regime. At the beginning of the story, he's blackmailed into informing on people, including those closest to him. I grabbed this book at the store not thinking about it too much because it's historical fiction, and I think it was even my first historical fiction. I wasn't certain I'd like this book at all. At the time, I didn't really know what historical fiction really is, and I was so pleasantly surprised when I started reading this book. It obviously has a strong historical aspect, as this book explores the regime Romania was under at the time, yet it was so immersive. I loved the main character. I loved all the characters actually. The story is very gut-wrenching, definitely not an easy read in that way, but the writing really pulls you in and you feel so attached to the characters because I think she writes in such an immersive and entertaining way while exploring such serious and important themes. I also love that the ending was very calm, and you can see that a rebellion, even a successful one, as well as a regime, has its consequences. Maybe the consequences aren't everlasting, but they don't fade away quickly. It's based on a real story, so it is fiction, but the main events that this book touches on are very real. I really loved it. One of my favorite books ever. I think all these books are my favorite books, to be honest, or at least, you know, some of my favorite books. So yeah, if I see another Ruta Sepetys' book, I will definitely get it. The next book that has stuck with me over the last few years is 11/22/63 by Stephen King, another historical fiction, by the way. And here we follow a high school teacher that discovers a way to travel back in time, specifically to 1958. Then he decides he could try to prevent the assassination of John F. Kennedy in 1963. So he travels back to 1958, and he has a few years ahead of him. So throughout the book we see how he lives in the past, how he tries to keep his real identity a secret, how he plans this mission, how he builds relationships that might either help him or ruin everything. There's also a romance subplot. Yeah, there are some romance subplots in his other books, but in this one it plays such a huge role. This book took me quite some time, and my main complaint is that the pacing felt so uneven sometimes. Some parts I think were fast-paced and very engaging, but some were pretty slow. So yeah, I think the pacing was uneven, but that is my only complaint about this book. Overall, I really liked it. Also, it touches on the butterfly effect, which is usually explored through time travel, and it clearly explores the consequences of time traveling, changing the past. I think it's definitely one of the best books he's written, or at least one of the best Stephen King books that I have read. Yeah, some things were very hard for me to accept, but still it had a huge impact on me and I loved it. And the last book we're going to talk about today is A Song to Drown Rivers by Anne Liang, a legend-inspired story about one of the four beauties of ancient China. It begins with a military advisor reaching out to our main character, who is one of those four beauties of China, and asking her to become one of the enemy's king's concubines so that she can secretly spy on them and her kingdom can plan this retaliation mission, I guess. I keep hearing a lot of people saying that it's fantasy. I think it does have some fantasy elements that only appear at the end of the story, but until then I think it reads just like historical fiction. The writing in this book was so immersive that I felt like I was right there walking the same places as the characters. I could truly feel the atmosphere of ancient China. It's amazing how her writing alone took me on this journey. I loved how our main character gets involved in royal court intrigue, how quick-witted she was. I think that's the best way I can describe her. There is a moment in the book when you might think that, okay, this is the end, we're done here, but there is something at the very end of the story that took me off guard. Yet I loved it, and looking back on all those books, they really are something else. Anyway, I guess that brings us to the end of this video. Let me know if you have any books that you genuinely think are special to you, and I will see you in the next video.